Hello, I am Anatole. Today on Man in the High Castle, we are going to review episode 4, and we are going to ask the question, if bombs and bullets win the war, do words and slogans win the peace? Episode 4 title, Sabra, which, according to my research, means a Jew born in Israel, which plays a little bit into the theme of the people in the neutral zone trying to create a sort of utopia for a refuge, more of a refuge for the Jewish people who wish to avoid persecution in either the Japanese Pacific states or in the greater German Reich. The review aggregate for this episode is 8.1 on IMDb. And quickly, let's go through the plot. Again, my plot description comes verbatim from Amazon's website. A new community fights for survival in the neutral zone. Juliana and Joe get reacquainted, while Joe continues his undercover work for Himmler. Wyatt drops in on Juliana in San Francisco. Smith's past rises up to haunt him. Ed and Childen face a challenge on their way home to San Francisco. As tensions between the Reich and the Empire rise, Tagomi finds his life may be in danger. And I found that the majority of the plot, the focus in this episode was in the Pacific states, with the three central figures being Tagomi, Juliana, and Joe, with Joe being the fulcrum between them, because, is that right? Joe? Yes, because in the end he also interacts with Tagomi. So Joe is the character who interacts with both Juliana and Tagomi. My initial impression of the episode was mixed. I felt that some of the scenes needed to be compressed, that we had one too many scenes of Ed and Childen, and one too many scenes of Thelma and Nicole together, and that maybe we could have expanded some of the other plot lines. It would have been nice to have seen more of Tagomi and Kido, even though there is a lot spent between them, or more with Joe Smith. But in the end, I think when you look back on the season, this episode won't stand out, but it did what it needed to do. It advanced many of the stories. But where I had some problems with the pacing of the episode and scene writing, scene construction, I was very satisfied and continue to be satisfied thematically with the show. And I thought that the show introduced one very important theme that advances the ideas of the show, and I'm excited to talk about that. And we'll do that right after the break. There were a couple scenes I want to discuss that happened in this episode. One was between the characters of Robert Childen and Ed McCarthy. And in the season so far, I've been a little unhappy with what they've done with the characters. It seems like the writers aren't quite certain. Now, correct that. I think the writers are certain what they want to do with the characters, but I think how they do it is a little bit, leaves a lot to be desired. The whole milieu, the whole scene of Denver, Colorado, I can see that the showrunner was trying to introduce a new place to set the story, and that the showrunner felt that putting us into the neutral zone was very important for the show. For one, it brings out diversity. By bringing out diversity, it highlights how that diversity is lacking in the Pacific states and in the greater German Reich. So many times when there's a scene in the neutral zone, we'll see African American characters, We'll hear African American music or artists that have a Jewish background. As in one point in the episode, we hear the song "Happy Days Are Here Again" from Ben Selvin, who was the son of Jewish and Russian immigrants, which was a very subtle way of emphasizing that this is a song you wouldn't hear in either the Japanese Pacific states or the Greater German Reich. But even though those things are very important for the show, in order to make it happen, and maybe to be budget conscious, we are given just one locale, one major setting in Colorado up till this episode, and that was the bar. That was the bar that the new character, Wyatt, owns and operates. And to make it so that these several different characters, to make it concise, the events that happen around them happen quickly so that you don't waste a lot of scenes getting them together. The showrunner, I imagine, gave the directive, this is what you do in this episode. These two characters are going to meet at this time. And then these characters are going to do this, and they're going to meet this other character that's been in the show. And all of it just feels really forced and contrived as far as having them all interact in this one scene. Now, the other thing I want to address is that in this season, Ed is revealed to be gay, to be homosexual, and it's created a little bit of controversy in the Reddit forums that I've read about Man in High Castle. I personally feel that it's fine for the character. The one issue I have, though, is that the way that this relationship is used to highlight conflict with the character of Childen, and that many of those scenes are just too on the nose. Childen is this way, and everything Ed does is going in regards to exploring his homosexual identity is just going to create conflict with Childen, and we see that in every scene. And there are too many of those scenes; they become redundant. We don't see a pattern of development, or the pattern of development between those two characters is too stilted because each scene strikes the same note. And that was where I said earlier that I felt that some of these scenes needed to be compressed. There was one scene in particular I felt could be removed, and I say this with reservation because generally the writers are pretty good. They don't just toss out a scene without it being developed later. And that's the scene where the woman comes to the bar, to Wyatt's bar, trying to sell a keepsake that she claims belonged to John Wayne. And at the end of the scene, Ed forces Childen to buy this relic at a higher price than Childen, I always do that, Childen really wants to. The fact that the two don't view business in the same way, we've seen that earlier, and I believe it was the second episode when Ed and Childen are at the gas station in somewhere like Arizona or Nevada, and they're buying petrol, and Childen is complaining that the price of petrol is 2 times higher than it was the week before, and then Childen tries to buy an heirloom that belonged to the father, the dead father of the man he's talking to, and Ed, pardon me one second, Ed, seeing that Childen is being too forward and not empathetic, just ends the discussion there. We've seen that before. We've seen that Ed has greater empathy and social awareness than Childen does. So to get that again just repeats what we've done already. So that's where I'm saying that relationship, the conflict between them of Ed finding his freedom, but because he's kind of redefining who he is, he's also redefining his relationship to other characters. For one, Childen, we need more growth. And I think we're going to get that because at the end of the episode, there's a major development where all their finances are stolen, and that will force them to come back to Denver, back to the place where Ed was finding he didn't want to leave because he was able to fully express himself in a way he couldn't in the Pacific states. Give me 1 second to drink some water. There's the second scene that I want to discuss. Acting scene. Thank you. In the episode, and that's between Joe and Juliana. And in this scene, and I have a picture, that's the reason why I stopped to get my Kindle screen reactivated. I have a picture still from that scene. I'll go ahead and show that and then discuss why I think it's significant. Here is, let me get that up there, get her in close. That's Juliana. There we go, thank you, autofocus. And that's during a protest that Juliana comes upon in San Francisco, protest for gasoline. And I think the significant scene in this picture is who is in it. We have an African-American woman, a Japanese-American woman, I'm going to guess, and then we have Juliana. And normally you wouldn't see those three people together. But at that point in the story, the writers are trying to draw a parallel between the idea of hard war and soft war. Hard war is one with bullets and bombs, and a soft war is one with propaganda. It's one with ideas. And in the first episode of the season, we were shown the conflict between how the approach that the Navy, the Japanese Navy would take in the Japanese Army. And the Japanese Navy is a proponent of the soft war, of winning people through the ideas. And here we see that approach is going to be difficult for the Japanese to do, because there is a form of insurgency going on, a form of civil demonstration. And there are other parallels that are drawn in that episode. Earlier, I think in my first episode, I wanted to discuss what was happening in the real world, our world, at the time that this episode is set. And that was in around May of 1963. And things that were happening around that time. May 2nd, 1963, 1,000 were arrested for civil rights protests in Birmingham, Alabama. Also around that same time, and we see that in this episode, June 11th, 1963, Thich Quang Duc burnt himself protesting the persecution of Buddhist monks by the government of Ngo Dinh Diem in the Republic of Vietnam. And we see that in this scene as well, that we see a monk dressed in the orange monk robe sit down, and because there is the protest for petrol, the monk takes that petrol and burns himself in a way of showing their displeasure at the lack of freedom and the lack of civil liberties. And that conflict draws back to Kido and Tagomi, since Tagomi is the trade minister. And so Kido can use that as leverage against Tagomi by showing that Tagomi's policies are leading to this unrest. And all of that comes back again to Juliana and Joe, because Juliana is there. And this is a little bit of a coincidence. I can't remember why she's there. It just seems like she happens upon it. So another coincidence. I'm not very fond of coincidences in literature. I feel like they should be motivated by character. The characters have a strong reason to be there that is part of the plot. But in any event, she's there, and just as the Kempeitai come and begin beating up on the protesters, Joe comes to her rescue and drags her aside, and that leads to them going off to an apartment. And while they're in that apartment, we see that the two of them are not being completely honest with each other. There's a level of deceit now in their relationship where maybe there wasn't before. There was at the very beginning when Joe was working for John and not being honest about the fact that he was working with the Germans. But now Juliana lies to Joe about why she wants to go to the Alleghenies, to the mine that she's flashed is important in the future. And Joe pulls a little bit of subterfuge, saying that since he's got weight with the German right, he can get her there. But not being honest about the fact that he's going around assassinating people right now, and Juliana is not being honest about the fact she's still working with the resistance. So that scene was great because it moved the plot forward, and it also, again, it demonstrated it was good in both character and theme. It showed the parallels that the world of Man in the High Castle has with our world, but the way that they're also different, and that it also widened the gap between those two characters, creating further conflict. So in that way, that scene was really good. Next, I would like to talk about some of the important thematic issues that I felt were in the episode. So join me after the break. Now I want to discuss some of the themes in the episode, and one very important theme is that of hard war versus soft war, or the idea of propaganda. So earlier in the show, seasons 1 and 2, the extent of the resistance and the way that it was pushing back against its occupation was in very small ways. So in smuggling the films, in small guerrilla activity, and in recruiting other members to join the resistance and help in the smuggling and small guerrilla activities. But now, in the third season, we're given a glimpse that the activities of the resistance are beginning to spread out and encompass such things as insurgency and in civil disobedience. We saw the insurgency in the very first episode, the very first scene of season 3, episode 1, where we saw Juliana was part of a guerrilla troop. And we haven't seen any more view of that, so we don't know if that was an alternative Earth, it was a view in the future. But it opened up the idea now that conflict with the occupying forces was going to become a little more heated, a little more direct. In contrast to that, the reappearance of Frank Frink brings an element of, well, he directly says hope. Let me read the quote that he says in the episode. We get it here, right here. Here's Frank with the character we met in season 1, the Jewish character, and both of them are in Sabra. And Frank is showing him his newest creation. Can you get this focused? Autofocus. There's the camera. Hello, camera. Can we get in there? Now you're focused on the poster back there. Oh, there. Do it. Do it. Do it. No? Well, you can see. And Frank in that scene says this quote, "Now, the sunrise, it represents hope, the promise and possibility of a new day, a new dawn." And we see that his ideas now are becoming popular, and that within the Pacific states, it's finding currency. People are taking that poster and putting it everywhere as an act of rebellion against the Japanese occupying force. And the way that this is significant is, up till here, the main way that the resistance spread its ideas was through movies. And movies are not the easiest way to distribute an idea. You need to have a particular mechanism to screen them, a film projector. They're hard to smuggle because they're very bulky. They're hard to produce. However, a poster is much easier to make, much easier to hide, much easier to put up. And so you can see that the ideas now they're breaking down into the grassroots and into ways that will be harder for a totalitarian state to push against. And another way that this conflict, this theme is significant is that it's it's opening up the realm of the noumenal, the idea, not the thing in itself is Kant would call it. So the thing in itself, the essence of a thing. And we see this idea of the essence of the subconscious in the scene where Joe Smith has his nightmare, and everyone that's significant in his life that has died or that he's directly killed. Thomas, his son, Raider, his assistant, and the German colleague of his that was acting as a traitor, they all appear to him in this dream. And this dream takes place in Cincinnati, which was the scene of a great pogrom of Jewish people. And we see a scene where there's a young girl, her family is killed by German soldiers, and one German soldier stands over her, and the gun misfires twice. And then, lacking the ability to kill her with his gun, the German soldier picks her up and windmills her around, and then, we can only presume, smashes her head into a concrete wall. And you can only guess how Joe Smith felt at the time, if he witnessed this firsthand or if he learned about it after the fact, and how much remorse he felt when it happened. But the fact that it's in his subconscious means that it's being repressed by him. And subconscious is the place where we find the things that we are aware of, but we aren't directing our focus on them. Maybe we aren't aware of them. They exist in our head, and we're trying to deny them. And the subconscious tells us, no, it's there, and it's really important to you. Here, pay attention. And you see this maybe in soldiers who come back from the war and are suffering PTSD, and they have nightmares every night. They find themselves back at the war. It's part of their being, and they will never be able. They can't deny it. As much as it would be helpful for them to not acknowledge it, that shadow, that pain is now in their being, and it won't go away. And the subconscious is that way. It contains things that cannot be destroyed. And as much as the Japanese would like to destroy ideas or feelings like hope and freedom, they cannot be completely eradicated. And as much as the Japanese try to push, or the Germans try to push or try to remove those ideas, they pop up in other places. Even if it's in the people who are doing the oppression, it's still within them on some level. And for Joe, those feelings may have been in there, and he was so strongly in denial of them that they were never an issue for him. But the death of Thomas, I'm presuming, is what has brought them out inside of him. I think that's about it. I had some, in case you missed it, notes. So one about Anareb, which is a project of Himmler. Anareb was established by Himmler to provide evidence for Nazi racial doctrine and promote these ideas to the German public through books, articles, exhibits, and conferences. And in The Man in the High Castle, this is the scientific arm that appears to be doing research into traveling between the two worlds. Cincinnati had the oldest Jewish community west of the Alleghenies, and I mentioned Happy Days. And that's all I have for this episode. Well, that is all for now. Please take care, be well, and I hope you'll join me again soon. Thank you. Hello, I am Anatole. Welcome. In today's episode, we are